Comfortable. We just do ask that you keep your camera off or perhaps anonymize your name if you're not comfortable being identified on the recording. And so without further ado, I will introduce the speaker of the hour, who is Doris Wesley. Doris Wesley is an award-winning communication and conflict academic and the founder of the GEM Daughters Network. She equips individuals, organizations, institutions, and communities with the necessary skills to transform conflict at any level using proprietary methodologies and proven multimodal communication strategies. Her research employs communication and peace-building approaches to transform conflict in Africa and the United States, which includes studying brave women in sub-Saharan Africa who use traditional indigenous intelligence and leverage digital tools to build resilience in their communities in challenging times. In addition to co-authoring the book Jihad in Sub-Saharan Africa, Dr. Wesley sits on advisory boards and consults on global sustainable development projects. Doris, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. It's so good to see all your beautiful faces. Thank you for joining today's session. So I'm just going to go ahead and start. It is an absolute honor to be speaking today at the Women's Economic Council Conference. So I'm going to be sharing with you the topic on building resilient networked communities amidst conflict experiences. And I would like to start by highlighting or expressing my excitement about how apt the theme for this conference, Solidarity Economy, is. And I'm going to share why I believe it's super good. So next slide. All right. So for one reason why this conversation on solidarity economy, I'm sure we've all been exploring since yesterday, is because for me, it expands and synergizes the three dominant expressions of my work as an academic, a practitioner, and a social impact entrepreneur. And I'm going to dissect how I've been able to explore all of those three expressions and what lessons I've learned from it and how it could be applied by anybody in any field or any designated location. So as an academic, like we all know, academics do rigorous research and teach diverse audience. As a practitioner, I often roll up my sleeves. I get into the practice of immersing myself and applying my professional skills on the field. And that's when I get to work with people living in communities. I really get dirty, like going day in, day out with them and really see their experiences from their perspective, as opposed to being behind the room or being within the confines of academia. And then as a social impact entrepreneur, I continue to serve conflict-affected women and girls through my nonprofit organization, which is the GEM Daughters Network. And I will expand on how some of the ways that we've been able to incorporate some solidarity economy perspective into the work that we do. Another reason is that it further expands the dimensions and area that I bring to my work on utilizing communication and peace-building approaches to transform multidimensional conflict-related contexts in Africa and United States, as mentioned in the introductory section. As such, I will be sharing some insights from the work I do across these three different but interconnected spaces, intending to not just highlight the innovative practices employed, but to challenge us all to contribute to the advancement of the solidarity economy through our various expressions. So while expanding on my own expression, I will be providing answers to the following questions as displayed on your screen, which are, what are network communities? What do they mean? How does conflict affect or disrupt any network community in any space? What are some of the peace-building approaches that are used to build a network community? And how do these approaches contribute to a solidarity economy? And so those are some of the questions I'm going to be shedding more light on as I dig deeper into my different expressions. So I'm going to begin with my first expression as an academic, which shares some findings from my own research, my recent research, and other scholars whose work continue to inform and inspire the work that I do. I often say that conflict is everywhere all the time. In fact, right now where we are gathered, conflict is right here. And it's not obvious, but it is. If any one of us want to bring it out, obviously it's just gonna pop up its head and we're gonna be able to deal with it. So although this statement seems very obvious to digest, conflict is everywhere all the time, right? It sometimes gets misunderstood. So let me shed some light on what it means. So when someone says, or an identity or an entity says, I don't want to cause conflict, what they actually mean is that they do not wish to bring it to the open. They do not wish to make conflict evident, because conflict already exists, but it should exist not to destroy us, but to actually provide opportunities to solve problems and to transform a situation, which is the healthy and constructive side of conflict.
So
And
sorry, Doris, not to interrupt here, it's Janelle, but some people in the chat are saying that they can't hear you well and are just asking you to speak up a bit.
oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
I will project. All right, awesome.
yeah, thank you. Maybe if you could go closer to your laptop mic, that may help.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Okay, okay. All right. Hopefully this should help. So, though the statement conflict is everywhere and all the time, is really obvious to digest, it's easy to digest, sometimes it can get misunderstood. And so I would like to share that when people say they don't want to, engage in conflict, what they actually are trying to mean is that they don't want to bring it to the open. And because conflict already exists, its purpose should not be to destroy us, but actually for us to be able to devise ways to solve problems, to transform a situation, and that is actually the healthy side of conflict. And so the popular saying, I believe most of us should be aware of this popular saying that goes that if one person or if a person avoids conflict to keep peace, they are indirectly starting a war inside themselves. And we can think about this in our present situation. Think about a time when you engaged in a conflict and you probably didn't express how you felt. You didn't express what you were experiencing. You didn't express what led to that. And guess what? You and your mind, you were just all thinking about the conflict. And that was you actually creating an internal war within yourselves. And even when peace means are used to handle conflict, peace doesn't necessarily equate to the absence of conflict. So whenever I'm talking about peace building, I do not want us to think about, oh, it's just going to be an El Dorado world where there are no conflict. But no, what I'm proposing is peace actually can exist in the midst of conflict. We just need to have the tools and know how to navigate this so that we can actually build the solidarity economy that we all seek. So while there's a growing culture, I'm beginning to see the trend on how to normalize conflict in our interpersonal relationships. The impact of the detrimental conflict that the women and girls I have worked with experience on a daily basis highlight the importance of truly honoring our commitment to building this solidarity economy, which we're all gathered here to learn and to unpack. So I've mentioned the phrase conflict now for the past 12 minutes, I guess. And you may be wondering, what does conflict mean? What is conflict? And I'd like to start with a basic definition of what conflict is. Conflict is a universally social constructive um, definition that involves the variety of situations. Conflict occurs when one or more person or one or more interdependent parties perceive incompatible goals, identities, values, and objectives. So conflict occurs when an entity perceives that another party is trying to to obstruct their own ability of achieving their goals. So think about this. Just look at this diagram and think about two different individuals who are going to two different directions. And this actually is likely to create separation or division. So whenever we think about conflict, while there's the emotional side of conflict, conflict is highly driven by perception. It's highly driven by what people think is behind the conflict. So whenever there's perception and it always has to do with incompatible goals, conflict is bound to arise. All right, so like me, if you listen to the lineup of presentations yesterday, which I hope most of you were here, and as well as the presentation we will be listening to today, you will have heard several insights that were shared. mind-blowing insight. But one thing I left yesterday's conference really thinking about was how do we, express all of these beautiful ideas if we do not know how to navigate conflict in our world? And because we know that conflict often creates division, conflict creates separation, one truth that actually stayed with me was our inability to transform the conflict we experience ultimately keeps us from attaining the solidarity economy we all seek. So in this image on the screen, it was an attempt to visually depict what the solidarity economy should look like in a transnational and transcontinental world of interconnected people. Think about interconnected organizations, economic initiatives, projects, and activities that are all committed towards building a better future and a better world together. So in other words, a resilient networked community entails a mass collaboration or a group solidarity among any unstructured population. And what makes it possible is the global interconnectivity that we all experience. Take, for instance, my personal experience. I'm currently located in the United States, but I work with grassroots and international local chapter organizations across the globe who serve conflict-affected women and girls in some rural areas in sub-Saharan Africa. And now I'm presenting my observations and findings to an interconnected group of bright minds at this work conference today. So you can see that in just one location, I'm able to do a lot of work with people in another continent. I'm able to present the same research on this space. So it just shows you how resilient a network community can be formed and how we can continue to nurse it. So the power of a global interconnectivity in building a networked community is actually needed to create the solidarity economy that we all seek to live in. But what is our reality telling us? What is my findings? What are they telling me? When I think about all of this beautiful insight of what a solidarity economy is, when I get on the field, what do I see? And that's some of the things that I want to share with you. But first, I'll share a particular research that I came across. I recently was startled when I came across a publication by economic scholars Solomon and Daira, who explain how war and conflict slows the nation's economy and disrupt global affairs. Their research estimates indicates that low-intensity conflict has the potential to reduce a country's annual revenue growth by 13%, and high-intensity conflict reduces annual revenue growth by 27%. This is quite a percentage, when we pause to really consider the statistics here. And women and girls, as we know, are often at the receiving end, constantly faced with difficult survival choices to make regarding their safety, their family, their relationships, their education, their health, their finances, and other important aspects of their livelihood. Examples of low income or low intensity conflict can be seen in the workplace, in any workplace conflict, or even other forms of interpersonal conflict, ranging from dyadic conflict. We can see that in an intergroup conflict, task conflict, value conflict, family conflict. Just think about some of the minor or, minor conflict that you experience on your day-to-day activities. And by the time we sum all of that up, it actually affects a country or a nation's revenue growth by 13% or more. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we are faced with the Ukraine and Russia conflict that we all experienced globally. We've all seen it in the news. The ongoing Israeli and Palestine conflict, conflict resulting from terrorist attacks by people in Asia or Africa that are experiencing that, as well as other intractable conflict cases happening in other local communities, around low-income countries, like Africa, in regions like Africa, which I will expand on since that's my area of expertise. All of this just speaks to the kind of high intensity conflict that occurs and derails the solidarity economy vision. Because when once one country is affected, guess what? We all are affected. When once one person is affected, we all are affected. The image on the screen here just shows women from East Africa who were actually displaced as a result of conflict happening within their communities. So these women lost their homes, these women have no place to be, and they're just there together. So how should that inform us as we begin to do this work in our different area of specialty? And that's what we'll be discussing today. All right. So my work on transforming conflict often takes a peace-building approach, like I established earlier, where I examine how diverse, brave women populations in various circumstances are leveraging their indigenous intelligence and using both digital and traditional methods to rebuild their lives as well as sustain peace within their communities in challenging times. So anything that often has, anything with depth, like we know, often begins with a bit of context and history. So I'm going to be walking you through some of the foundational knowledge when it comes to peace building and what does that mean? So my research often involves expanding on Johan Galtong's novel idea to move beyond the traditional conflict prevention strategies of peacekeeping and peacemaking as displayed on the left side or left section of this slide. Peacekeeping often involves deploying military forces to de-escalate a conflict situation. And I'm sure we all are aware whenever we see any conflict happening, let's say a very huge conflict like the intractable Ukraine or Russia war or the Israeli and Palestine conflict, we see how military officers are deployed. But what does that mean? That means that, and I'm going to speak more to it, deploying military forces to de-escalate conflict is creating a conflict in itself. And then while peacemaking entails diplomatic actions where third parties are invited to mediate conflict by either signing a peace agreement, which can either go negative or positive. So sometimes even after signing those peace treaties, we still see that the countries still continue to have conflict. And it doesn't really go away. So it really depends. So instead of engaging in the two strategies of peacekeeping and peace building, my work focuses on online and offline peace building approaches, which are a positive way to transform conflict without resorting to violence. Most people have it that peace building is a weak approach, but I would say it's not, so long as it is approaching conflict from a non-violent perspective and it gets the job done where there's so much peace within the land and we can be able to do the things we all really need to do, then it's a good approach. So it is about finding other constructive ways to deal with the situation, engaging in communication, opening our awareness, helping ourselves and others see the different perspective and proposing a better future or a better path forward, which is what the solidarity economy is about, if you would agree with me. So as displayed on the right side of the screen, my work, both as a scholar and as a practitioner, also draws from John Liderach's idea of the peace building pyramid, which I would really recommend everyone really, try to just understand what this means and see how they can apply it into their own respective fields. It illustrates the three different levels of leadership that are vital for building a culture of peace and a solidarity economy in the long run. So the top of the pyramid, as seen on the right side of this slide, signifies the highest level of leadership, which uses power and influence, policy and peace, either through the forms of diplomacy or force. They include military institutions, political leaders, and religious leaders who have a very high visibility. At the lower level, it entails leaders at the grassroots level who deal with conflict daily and have the potential to influence any process by relying on the grassroots initiatives. This include local leaders, leaders from indigenous grassroots, NGO organizations, community developers, local health officials, and so on. In between these two levels, which is the mid-level section, are leaders across several respected organizational sectors who have links to both the top and the bottom leadership levels. And this could be humanitarian leaders, academics, intellectuals, ethnic leaders, and so on. So by identifying the three pillars of this peace building pyramid to engage with, especially when attempting to drive any form of change, we need to ask ourselves, okay, now that I'm approaching this change, now that I'm working towards a solidarity economy, which part of this triangle am I focusing on? And which leaders in this triangle, on this triangle, should I use or leverage on while doing my work? I can only speak for myself. I know I use both the middle and the lower level, which I'm going to share more light on as I make progress. So, my experience working with conflict and violence survivors at the lower level, like I mentioned earlier, as well as the mid-level leaders in women-based organizations due to their commitment to conflict-affected women and girls at the grassroots level and their connections to elites at the top levels who may be distanced from conflict and peace-building realities. They inform me that attaining a healthy solidarity economy culture should be done from below. So we realize that when we begin to do things from below, it's like below top, we're able to averse and unearth the number of populations. We're working in numbers and we're able to change the dynamics of things at a faster pace. And what happens again at this lower level is that there's little to no power dynamics. And women can devise indigenous innovative means without external control. Like the women I work with in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, we see these women not waiting for international organizations to come help them fix their communities. They are there creating and devising innovative ways, which I will be highlighting as I make progress in this conversation. And so when we also think about sub-Saharan Africa, which is something I've said severally throughout this conversation, where I carry out most of my on-the-field practice with individuals and leaders, both at the lower and mid-level peace-building pyramid. The term is used to describe the area of the African continent that lies south of the Saharan Desert. So geographically and ethnoculturally speaking, the demarcation line is the southern edge of the Sahara Desert, consisting of 46 of 54 African countries, as seen or as shown on red on the screen here. And so these are the kind of people, and these are the locations I work with, just working with thought leaders, women, children within all of this region. And we do all the work just to make sure that we're able to get their voices heard and to build the economy that we all need to thrive in. All right, so there is no denying of the fact that sub-Saharan Africa is rife with conflict. Many of its countries have experienced internal conflict and terrorist attacks committed by state and non-state actors. So during my recent interviews with the grassroots leaders and conflict-affected women and girls, I got to understand the kinds of prevailing conflicts these populations are faced with and how they work to address them and create an inclusive community peace-building practices. So working with this conflict-affected population, I've been able to see that they are still faced with the challenges and expectations to conform to societal and cultural norms, as well as facing various kinds of systemic structural oppressions, as seen on the first image on this slide, where the military was deployed to a community civil protest in Zimbabwe. And with the presence of weapons and vicious attack from law enforcers, conflict-affected women were unable to participate in the political civil protests that they were currently engaging in. Other instances or other hindrances of participation includes, limited access to resources, economic challenges, conflict-affected women underrepresentation in leadership roles, and predominantly issues with gender-based violence, given the multiple rape stories that were reported during my interviews with these women and girls. But interestingly, on the flip side, some NGO leaders continue to advocate for gender-sensitive policies, and they are devising strategies for inclusion by investing resources in creating programs that upskill these conflict-affected women and girls, either through financial literacy, as seen taking place in Rwanda, digital literacy training on how these women in Mali can use their phones in a conflict situation, or vocational training in Togo to become more economically empowered, as depicted through these images on the screen. Also, the population experiences a variety of conflicts, including gender-based violence, communal clashes, female genital mutilation, maternal issues, harm conflict, ethnic conflict, family conflict, political violence, environmental violence, and chieftaincy title issues. These are what these women are daily engaging with. Or daily experiencing, which further limits their ability to really present themselves in the world that we all seek to thrive in. So understanding such sub-Saharan conflict types gives us an insight into the kinds of conflicts these women and girls are faced with and the peace-building approaches that they are engaging in. And I'm going to be highlighting a few. There were so many out there that are worth describing. So while the political violence seems to be prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, looking at the top 3 images on this slide, the first one depicts women who were protesting to stop a gender-based violent occurrence in Liberia. The second image shows women engaging in illegal gold mining in Ghana. And then the third image depicts how oil crisis in sub-Saharan region of Nigeria pollutes communities. And examples of these issues, these environmental issues and other kinds of conflict continue to negatively impact women and children. So despite these challenges, these women have been creative in several ways. In my interview with them and the community leaders that actually work with these women, I had to learn that these women are creative in using technologies such as their mobile phones, for peace advancement in other communities, because it's an easier digital tool to navigate. So they would use their phone to really update themselves whenever there's a conflict situation happening in their communities, which should be applauded, given that these women are mostly located in the rural area, of their countries. And, sometimes they have issues with interconnectivity, internet, infrastructural damages, and all sorts. So they've also been seen establishing a group solidarity and an interconnected networked communities. For example, there's this group called the Peace Brigade. It's on the left lower side of the screen, and they're these women in white. And so this is a group of women who it's just like a local group of conflict affected women in Liberia who are spread across 15 districts. And this group of supposedly uneducated women do not depend on international organizations, neither do they have offices, but these women volunteer themselves to tackle conflicts by hanging around. So what these women do is they hang around certain hidden locations around their communities, and they rely on informal channels and secretly coded grassroots efforts to alert themselves whenever there is a violence done against women or any kind of violence occurs within the community. In my attempt while interviewing these women to kind of know what those secret codes are, they didn't tell me. They were like, no, if I tell you, then it's no longer secret. But what's the goal there? The driving force there is that it works. And so they actually keep it coded among themselves, and they've used it severally to create peace within their communities. Other types of ways that women affected by conflict have actually devised ways is that they actually have formed a support group for themselves where they create and they regularly meet to share and honor stories of survivors of conflict like them. And so you see them, and these stories might be impactful or it might be painful, but regardless, these women are creating the space to have those hard conversations among themselves. And we see it at the lower right section of the screen where these women would come together, share their stories, and then, create like a traditional culture amongst themselves where they will burn up the stories as a way of really releasing the emotions that came with the experiences. And that was one of the ways that they were able to seek healing as they went through, as they navigated their livelihood. They also regularly hold peace hearts meetings where conflict affected women across regions. So they don't necessarily have to be in the same location, but they could come from anywhere. And so what that does is they gather together and they brainstorm on how they can end violence against women and girls and strategically raise awareness of the various projects and initiatives that they are currently working on. And another interesting thing that I learned during the course of my field work with these amazing brave women was that these women also lean more into their feminine identity as African women, which is some of the things that are hardly talked about. And sometimes you see them using their beauty to resolve conflict, their personality, and their indigenous intelligence. And so all of these findings from my field work, which I've been able to highlight a few of them here today, using the case study of the conflict-affected women and girls in sub-Saharan Africa, they demonstrate how collaborative advocacy and bottom-up grassroots mobilizations are effective in fostering an inclusive and sustainable solidarity economy. All right. So based on these lessons from the field work, how are network communities created? How can you leave this presentation or this conference today and say, okay, I'm ready to create a network community? It means that a network community should consist of a group of people with shared similarities, shared characteristics, and shared interests. They might live in the same neighborhood, or they might be distributed across a wider geographical location. But the aim is that they should have a common goal and they should devise means to connect and make visible shared opportunities. Network like this should structure collective actions towards a greater purpose and bring about a community that is alive and thriving. So anyone who is able to have such a powerhouse community, then I would say that you've actually, you're actually creating a network of community that could help do the work of building a solidarity economy. And an example I will be pulling from, which is a case study, is from a network community is from the third expression of my work, which is the work I do with my nonprofit, the Germ Daughters Network. As a social entrepreneur, this is what I focus on in addition to also consulting for other SDG goals and just sitting on different boards to just work on making this work better as we keep going forward. So what does that mean? The Germ Daughters Network is a nonprofit organization, like I mentioned earlier, but they focus on supporting women and girls who are experiencing or have experienced a dysfunctional father-to-daughter relationship. So given that the conflict in the lives of these women and girls have actually led them to their present situation, what we do is we're currently on a mission to helping 1 million of them located around the world, regardless of their locations, so that we can help transform their experiences, recognize their value, and nurse their true potential, and redesign a purposeful future for themselves. So we help these women by providing them with the digital resources, mentorship, opportunities, and internally structured community to inspire, transform, and empower themselves. My work with this population, either conflict-affected women and girls in sub-Saharan Africa or these daddyless daughters as shown on the screen, has actually taught me that conflict should be carefully chosen and directly confronted so as not to result in dire consequences for institutions, for groups, for organizations, or even for individuals. So using proprietary methodologies and proven multimodal communication strategies I have developed from my scholarly and field experience, our nonprofit relies on some concrete framework that I'll be sharing with you. And this concrete framework has actually been used in my community engagement work, has been used when I write my research to just, publish and put the word out there. And I'm sharing them with you with the hopes that you also apply them in your respective area of deployment. All right, the first one, which seems quite simple, but in practicality can really require a lot from us, and that's the LEARN acronym, which stands for listening, listen, engage, acknowledge, build rapport, and nurture relationships. And I'm going to be sharing more about what each of these acronym means, and they all stand for learn. And it's a way of resolving conflict. You could use this in resolving conflict in your interpersonal lives, in your organizations, in your communities, anywhere, so long as you are approaching towards a transformative side of conflict resolution, then this acronym or this strategy can be applied. So listening opens the door for creative brainstorming and problem solving that can lead to solutions where all needs are met. We can listen to ourselves and we can listen to others for underlying needs and interests. So whenever there's a conflict, like I mentioned earlier, these are different people with competing ideologies, competing values, competing needs. But when we begin to listen into their needs and we begin to listen into ourselves for our needs, we can begin to come to an agreement or just like a mutual understanding of what are some shared needs we all have. And even if you can't have it your way or I can't have it my way, how can we come to a middle ground? Engaging is also another point where another strategy that can take place by asking questions, presenting observations and ideas, and actually being authentic during our sharing. And so when we're talking to people, we should always start from a place of curiosity, wanting to really know how did we get here? Where do we go forward? Or how can we move from where we are to where we want to be? Acknowledging is also another where it means actually validating other people's ideas, their feelings, their values, their thoughts, their perceptions, even if we don't agree with it. Just acknowledging that I see you and I recognize that this is what you're experiencing just has a good soft way of just easing any conflict situation. Also, building rapport shows up in how we discuss our needs, how we share stories with one another, and it also results to a shared understanding. And finally, nurturing relationships can arise by talking between meetings or providing constructive feedback, checking up on each other, just making sure that we're doing the work towards driving the change that we all seek. So that's all about the LEARN acronym. And then we have another one. Another one is the facilitated intergroup dialogue approach. So this is taking it, at least for the LEARN acronym, we can see that, oh, this can be applied in an interpersonal situation. But in an intergroup dialogue approach, this could result in two groups having conflict, or two nations having conflict, or two communities having conflict. So this is taking conflict from a micro level to a macro or a meso level and seeing how do we resolve this. And so there are three different stages. We have the analysis, the vision, and the action. And so the first stage, which is the analysis process, usually begins with bringing together conflict members from both sides, which could include people, organizational leaders, or communities, like I mentioned earlier, who are interested in working towards a shared goal. So whenever there's a conflict, the truth is that two different people actually wants to get their needs met. And so how do we bring them towards working towards one goal? Or even if it's not one, at least a shared goal where they can see their own needs being met in the goal and as well as other people's needs being met. So the step involves analyzing the current situation that affects the effort. So it's just bringing these two people together and just analyze the situation. How did we get here? What do we need to do? What happened? Tell me, what are your interests? What are your needs? What are your feelings? And all of those will be dissected in this phase. The second stage, which is the vision stage, like I like to call it, often entails each party describing their view of the conflict to build collective vision for the future. This requires a little bit of patience because yes, and this is why it is a facilitated dialogue. So it's always best when people who are working with these two different groups or multiple groups who are having conflict do not take sides with anyone. They just have to be very objective and make sure that they are able to really see the vision each person has to bring to the table. And then finally, we have the third stage, which is the action process, and it involves a systematic exchange of ideas and perceptions to develop a specific and concrete action plan towards shared collaboration. So yes, we now know the reason of the conflict, which is the analysis stage. We know the shared vision, which is how we would want to resolve it. The final phase should be, what should we do? How can we act? What is the next best step to take? Any concrete action that can move us from where we are to where we want to get to. All right. So to conclude this presentation, so I can give room for Q&A, and if anybody has questions to ask, I'm actually proposing a call to actions for NGOs, policymakers, community organizers, practitioners like me, who are engaged in the pursuit of building and sustaining a solidarity economy. And what am I proposing? The first is to adopt a gender-sensitive approach to transforming conflict by putting women and children at the forefront of policies as they engage in both traditional or digital peace-building processes. So yes, we have lots of policies, but when a policy is taken and is applied to a woman or children, the dynamics are changed because our experiences cannot just be generalized. And that's why we need to be very conscious of what are some gender sensitive approach that I can take with the work I'm doing or with the work you are doing, asking yourself, okay, what perspective can I bring to this, and how can it really benefit the women and girls that we serve and that we are as a society. Another is actually fostering an environment that normalizes healthy conflict. Like I said, we need to get to a point where conflict is okay to exist. However, we just need to know how to transform it. Transform it means looking behind, underneath the conflict, and getting to the core root of why the conflict even happened in the first place, as opposed to avoiding it or compromising or just doing certain kind of destructive and unhealthy ways of navigating conflict. So we need to also keep in mind in any conflict situation the context and cultures that are at play when devising strategies to transform any unique experiences of conflict. The way I will navigate conflict as an African woman living in the United States will be different from the way you will navigate conflict. So we need to be able to be aware of the cultural dynamics that are at play at any given situation when we are faced with any conflict that we're experiencing. And finally, strengthen and deepen our network communities. And we can do this by catalyzing collective actions and helping each member discover their new potentials or goals. And I do this with my nonprofits in the women that we serve. So it's just looking within your organizations, looking within your institution, and asking yourself, what is the collective action we all stand for? And how are we helping each other within this unit? And how does it contribute to the long-term goal of solidarity economy? So just having all of these different situations, different approaches, different perspectives and insight just at the forefront of our mind can help us continue to build towards the world that we seek to live in. Thank you. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you may have. Thank you.
If anyone has questions, feel free to post them in the chat, or you can use the React button to put your hand up. Well, I'll start off with a question for you, Doris. So I'm just curious, maybe how can communities kind of leverage like Indigenous intelligence and digital tools to build resilience in like conflict affected areas, and then transferring like that information to different contexts, like within North America? How would you go about doing that?
Yeah, I love that question. So like I said, anytime we have any culture, or I'm sorry, anytime we have any community, we need to be able to ask ourselves, what are some things that they are doing that is unique to them? So the experiences I'm sharing is from the African context, like I highlighted earlier. So as opposed to me telling you, oh, this is what the African did, I think we can also do it here, I'll be like, no, we can't. Because sometimes you could take that same method and apply it in a different culture and it wouldn't even work at all. So that's why I said we need to start from a place of curiosity. Let's look within the community and ask ourselves, what are some patterns that I'm noticing? What are some things that these people are doing that is making them themselves, bringing about the identity in the fullness that they can express? And it's in the long run resolving any conflict situation. So our ability to be able to see through that lens will help us deduce what is unique to that particular community. So yes, but although there are some general applications like I shared earlier with the LEARN acronym, where we all should know how to listen, right? We should know how to acknowledge people, know how to engage in a conversation, know how to nurture relationships, know how to build rapport. So those are kind of things that could still be applied even working in a different context. Those are universal principles, but again, everything still boils down to it's going to have to be unique based on the different cases we're facing. I could use myself as an example. When the Israeli and the Palestinian war was going on, I had some of my colleagues ask me to write about the conflict situation because I'm a conflict scholar, right? And I just said, I'm sorry, I can't. And they were like, why? I'm like, because I don't have the experience, I don't have the shared cultural value. I can't see things the way they can see it. I can only give a speculated general principles to apply, but still it's going to be unique. I'm sure that person was disappointed, but I knew that taking that route was the best way to resolve the conflict the right way needed to. Thank you.
Thanks, Doris. That was a really, really great answer. And the self-reflection piece, being able to take a step back and ask yourself, whether or not you're well-versed enough or have the lived experience to respond is such a great quality. Any other questions? Prachi says in the chat, learn is a helpful way to begin dialogue. Thank you, Doris. It's a comment from Prachi. I don't see any other hands up, so I'll go ahead and ask a second question then. Can you share some insights from your research on women's roles in peace building in sub-Saharan Africa? And is there any kind of connection with like participatory action, like research in that sense, like consulting with the community and building resolutions based on their opinions and experiences?
Yeah. Based on my experience with these women, the women are quite comfortable working with an organization who represents them, as opposed to just anyone. So my work with them, I had to go through the organizations who represent those women. Just coming to the women on my own, I probably wouldn't have even gone past the door. You know what I mean? So there's that. They really prioritize trust. And they've been able to work with women like organizations like the West African Peace Building Organization. Sometimes they work with international organizations like the United Nations, the World Force, but there's a difference in the way they work. The way they work with those organizations is just to get funding, but because those organizations are not really on ground, they are not really at the local level trying to really understand the kind of conflict that these women deal with. And so there's sometimes that these women will work with the organizations, and there's sometimes that these women will just work on their own. And like I shared earlier with the Peace Brigade, and that was quite fascinating to see a group of women who have been affected by conflict for so long, who just got to a point and they were like, you know what, we're not going to wait for the government anymore. We're not going to sit down here complaining and waiting for a savior. It almost puts them in this savior complex mentality where we're waiting for the Western world to come save us. You know what I mean? And so these women were just like, you know what, we're going to fix it. And the way they went about fixing it, like I said, they had some secret codes. I don't even know the codes. Even the organizations they work with do not know the codes. But the real truth is that we're able to look at it from an outside in perspective. And we're seeing a lot of improvement and a lot of growth and change within building peace in their communities. So that's some of the things that I've been able to find just by doing the work, on the field. And sometimes I've interviewed these women, and what makes it super helpful is by the time I'm able to establish my shared connection as an African woman myself, they get at ease and they're like, okay, now this is not one Western, girl trying to just come get some data from us and then go use it for our own personal, professional pursuit and all of that. So it's just so beautiful to see the resilience in these women, regardless of what they are faced with. They're just creating different means to help themselves without waiting for an external institution. And I think that's really powerful. Yeah.
It is. It is. There's so much that we can take away from that presentation. Thank you so, so much, Doris, for sharing your lived experience, your professional experience, and for sharing those communication and conflict mitigation strategies, really applicable. Prachi in the chat says valuable insights and takeaways. And so we do have 6 minutes left, so we're going to wrap up. Last call for any final quick comments or questions. Just checking whether there's any hands raised. If not, we will end here. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And thank you, Doris, for this amazing presentation. We hope to see everyone in the next session. Thank you.
Thank you so much.